This is the Welcome to Humanity podcast with thought leader and transformative psychiatrist, Dr. Fred Moss. This show focuses on the betterment of humanity on a global scale. Each episode will leave you enlightened, inspired, and ready to make an impact in your world. Welcome to the show. Welcome to your life. Welcome to humanity. Here's Dr. Fred.
One of the best things that happens with being a host of a podcast, for those of you who already know this, excuse the redundancy, but those of you who aren't hosts, is you get to meet just spectacular people. You just get to meet extraordinary people and have them here to be interviewed, have them here to show off like who they are. And I mean show off in all the colors and all the shapes of what it is to be a human. Today is not only no exception. We have an exemplary manifestation of what it is to be a human, a contributing human, a caring human, a human who is living a full life and who has lived a full life to get to exactly where he is. So today we have my friend, Dr. Richard Shuster, joining us. And Dr. Richard, it's really, really awesome to have you. Thank you for being here with us.
It is a pleasure, Dr. Fred. We're going to have a lot of fun today.
Yes, we are. Each and every one of us is really dealing with something, right? No matter whether we're tackling some of the big problems in the world or maybe even the tiny ones, we all face challenges. Now, I've been a psychiatrist for many years, and I've worked with all kinds of people from all walks of life. I've worked with more people than I can really count, from various backgrounds, dealing with more issues than you can imagine, of all sizes and shapes. So naturally, over time, I've developed a number of ways to assist others in gaining a new sense of freedom and empowerment. Now, I'm pulling back the curtain on one of those methodologies, and I'm going public, revealing the process and associated mindset that contributed to using this particular method with maximum effectiveness. It's all laid out in my new book called Creative 8, Healing Through Creativity and Self-Expression. You can pick this book up on Amazon.com in either Kindle or paperback format. And as a listener to the Welcome to Humanity podcast, I'd like to offer you a completely free copy in audiobook format. Just go to welcometohumanity.net/creative and download your free audiobook copy of Creative 8 today. I really look forward to hearing about your Creative 8 breakthrough. Now, let's get back to this amazing conversation. Welcome to humanity. So let's get started. You know, our listeners might know a little bit about me and not you, or a little bit about you and not me, depending on who's listening, when and where. Or they might even know a little bit about both of us, or think that they know us all together, or even in the rare case, not know either of us at all and having tripped over this particular podcast. Any of those things hold, and any of those things are possible. So one question I like to start off with, it's just kind of an open-ended question, and I like to say it's a question with less than 10 letters, a full sentence, in fact, with less than 10 letters, but an open-ended question with less than 10 letters, and I'm going to lay out for you here. So here we go, Dr. Richard. Who are you?
I can't help but think of the Les Mis song, with Jean Valjean, and want to break into singing here.
Go right ahead.
I won't, for the sake of the ears of your audience. Who am I? I am a clinical psychologist by training, who has dedicated his life to helping people become the best versions of themselves, even if it's of no direct benefit to me through my various platforms. I don't know if that was 10, certainly wasn't 10 letters.
Oh, no, it's the sentence, who are you, that's 10 letters. So, yeah, so you help people become their very best using even, say this again, even if it's
of no direct benefit to myself.
I see. Okay. So what drives that? I mean, a man like you could be doing a lot of things, right? You could be water skiing. You could be ballroom dancing. You could be sleeping. You could be doing a lot of things. So what wakes you up in the morning and has you decide again to be this man?
It's an interesting question, and it's a complicated answer because there have been points in my life that have directly framed and shaped what it is that I'm doing and how I show up in the world every day. The earliest one of this was in my mid-20s when I was not a prime candidate to, you referred to me as an exemplary manifestation of what it is to be a human being. In my mid-20s, I was far from that. I was extraordinarily greedy, materialistic, really only focused on creating ridiculous wealth for myself, having stuff for the sake of having stuff. And then I experienced kind of a really life-altering moment in which I was in a car accident that broke my spine, and I nearly died. And so, I've done a TEDx talk on this, and I know we're on limited time, so I won't go through the whole story. But basically, that put me on a journey of shifting my work from that of gimme, gimme, gimme to let's make a difference in the lives of other people. And the way that I went about that journey was to obtain a master's in social work and then ultimately a doctorate in clinical psychology. And then I subspecialized in forensic and neuropsychology. And that was awesome. I was working a lot with sexually abused kids and feeling really good, but I wanted this burning desire to do more and be more.
It's fabulous. As we've shared before, I've had a couple of those kind of motor vehicle accidents in my life, 2 of them, and, that were completely ridiculous. Looking at the automobiles afterwards, it was like, okay, no one lived. No one lived in those accidents. And, I'm here to say that I, at least by all counts, I've lived through both of those accidents, and they were both massive life changers. So, here you are, a taker. Here you are as wealth, more, bigger, and, selfish, and the furthest thing from a exemplary manifestation of what it is to be a human. And then kaboom, like literally kaboom happens. And you can even share with me this, Dr. Richard, because here's the thing. I know exactly what you're talking about. And at least for me, I have something that resonates cleanly with what you're saying. Can you try to put words for us a little bit about like what happens at that moment, or when you realize, wow, I almost died, or here I am laid up in a hospital, or my spine is broken, or that wasn't working out as well as I thought, or whatever you have that then has an abrupt paradigmatic shifting change in direction?
Well, I'll answer that in 2 ways. One is that there's a phenomenon known as tachypsychia, and we have a lot of evidence in this, soldiers reporting this going back hundreds of years. Basically, when people perceive they're about to die, time slows for them, or rather, time doesn't slow, but their perception of time slows. So kind of think Neo in the Matrix here. So in that moment from when the car slams into me and my airbag goes off and I'm sent into oncoming traffic and ultimately crash into a telephone pole, that's what stopped my vehicle's momentum. That whole scenario was maybe 3 seconds, Dr. Fred. And it wasn't one of these moments where I was pleading to God, please let me live. I'm going to be a good person.
No.
I was dead. I knew I was dead.
Yeah.
I could, but the phenomenon of experiencing this was so surreal. Like I could see my windshield shattering, but it was all in slow motion. And like I'm watching little shards of glass floating in the air and the light of the sun reflecting off of them. And I looked to my right and I could see my center console just being crushed into my rib cage. It was like somebody was captured a can of Coke being crushed in like super slow motion on their iPhone, but I had no sensation of pain. And I was really in my thoughts thinking, my parents are going to get this call that I'm dead. I wasn't married yet, but I was thinking very, very heavily of my family. I was reflecting on the things that I have accumulated that I certainly wouldn't be taking with me, and pretty resigned to the fact was shame. If I had died, my last emotion would have been shame and guilt. Spoiler alert, I lived, right? But, it wasn't, I wish it was. It wasn't this moment where, I'm lying in the hospital and I balled up my fist at the sky and said, I'm going to be, kind and generous, and it wasn't that. What it was kind of through, I went into this black hole for the next couple of years where, soul searching, and then a series of events happened to which I shifted what I was doing, and then, found my way onto this path of altruism. And that became a thing for me. It wasn't an overnight thing. It took some time for that to develop.
Okay, so this is really the purpose of our conversation, is to spotlight your greatness, even however you got here. But I want to take another moment, and maybe we'll talk more about this in another time off air, to let you know that what I was saying before about relating to you you're like resonating with you, just got upgraded rather than downgraded. I completely have in place. Well, my experiencing over my near-death experiences or my ridiculous car accidents to your experience here, the 7 seconds that they said when I was rolling off I-94 into the trees and even head over heels at 90 miles an hour, the words to describe those seconds aren't really available. And it didn't happen after it. And whatever happened there happened. And my reflection into my family and, oh, what about my kids? Or, oh, darn, I thought I had something to do here. Like, there was like this conversation with myself and my world around me that I think you're pointing to that then leads to a path, sort of a natural pathway of a different direction. And in your case, towards this pathway of altruism, which you self-describe yourself as having taken a couple years later, actually, right? It doesn't happen overnight.
It didn't for me. It wasn't like, as God is my witness, I'll never go hungry again, like quoting, Scarlett from Gone with the Wind. It wasn't like that. I mean, it really, for me, was a painful couple of years, physically and emotionally, of figuring out what in the world I'm supposed to be doing with my life. But thankfully, I think I got it right.
Well, that's kind of interesting, right? So you've now got to a space, we're in an interesting time and place, and, it's now, after all. Again, isn't that interesting? It's always now, and it's now again. And so to say something so bold as I think I have it right takes something, Dr. Richard. It really does, to say, yep, this. Now, on the other hand, I think I got this right sort of has trailed me even when retrospectively I didn't. I look back and I'm like, yeah, I was pretty bullish back then, or I was up to some pretty wrong things, or I was chasing down some pretty elusive non-essentials, or I was being a person that I don't respect. And I must have thought at the time that I might have got it right at the time. So I'm going to ask you the question now, which is, what has you think or know or feel or be with the idea that you have it right now? What's your life look like that has it qualify as having it right?
So I'm going to jump back to 2017 to answer that question, because I had graduated. I was licensed and in practice for several years, doing my thing as a psychologist, because that's all when you're in training for school, this, like the end goal is practice, right? Practice. One day I'm going to be licensed. I'm going to have practice. And I did. And I was doing great. And then the funniest thing was I just kept feeling this inkling that I should be doing more, that I should be making an impact on a larger scale. Not that the work that I was doing with sexually abused kids wasn't important. It was. But how do I impact more than 300 families a year? And so I decided to start a podcast, and got very, very lucky as to how quickly that grew, because NBC got a hold of me. And when NBC found me, I went from my cousins and my grandma and buddies listening to the show to, holy cow, I'm in 150 countries. And really well-known and respected people are calling me an influencer. And so then it was, well, okay, I've got a responsibility now with this platform to really help people. So to answer that question, what I'm doing now, in that I speak on large platforms and stages, virtually now, of course, because nobody's on stages anymore due to the pandemic. But I have a podcast that reaches so many people all over the planet. And then I have built a technology platform which helps improve people's lives. I wake up every morning excited about what's to come. I don't always know. And it's certainly, I get on my schedule, oh, awesome, an interview at noon with Dr. Fred, or, a podcast with somebody else. But it's the surprises that happen. And when you are living in alignment with your values, your purpose, and you really know in your bones what you're supposed to be doing, it's pretty incredible how these other people kind of filter into your life. Like how you and I got connected. We were connected through a fellow in a relationship. And that only happens if I have my podcast. If I don't have my podcast, literally none of the things that I'm doing today would be possible. So, I'm very grateful for that. But I don't wake up asking myself anymore, what else can I be doing? I ask myself, how can I leverage what I'm doing to better help people?
That's amazing. So that's a spectacular position to have in this, in this temporary thing we call life. I think everyone now might be able to get at least a bird's eye view of what you mean when you think you've got it. That there's something in your life right now that is worthwhile, that you're a massive contribution, that you're improving lives around you, whether or not it has anything to do with you, that you're indeed an impact playing influencer, whether you like it or not. You're out there in half the countries in the world. There's something about waking up that has it be exciting. And leveraging where you are becomes the question rather than either why am I here or what am I going to do today? There's something like following the pathway that you've already forged for yourself that's creating a life that matters. So congratulations. And, you mentioned this earlier. I want to point to it, which is this comes with a deep responsibility, doesn't it? I mean, a deep sort of like a Charles Barkley-like responsibility of being a role model. Like there's something about who you are, what you say, what you think, how you declare yourself, what you do either in public or private actually matter. It actually matters to more than you. And there's some sort of accountability and responsibility that comes with that position you find yourself in. Can you speak to that?
I think you get to this point where you realize because when I started the podcast, it was really quite hilarious in retrospect. I had no idea what I was doing. Never done this before. I had some roughly translatable clinical interviewing skills as a clinician that I think helped me, particularly early on, be a podcaster. But how to build it, what happens then, none of that was on my radar at all. And I think that people who achieve success, especially in the beginning, have a bit of imposter syndrome. And so when these people were coming to me saying, hey, I represent best-selling author Jane Doe, and we really want to put her on your show because she's launching a new book. And the question I would always ask these people is, well, what brought you to me? Inside, I'm thinking, what? I am? But when enough people came to me who had no connection to each other and said more or less the same thing over and over again, it was kind of like Neo in the Matrix with the spoon. I was like, oh, well, I guess I am an influencer. And so then, and that's just my values. Person B might become an influencer who is in the same stage I was at, before my car accident. Like, awesome, I'm going to milk this for every cent it's worth, and I'm the best thing since sliced bread. That's what would have happened if I had done this successfully, in my 20s. I would have been an incorrigible jerk and, really excited about milking every penny out of every person I could. I think that it just comes down to what are your goals? What are your values? Goals and values can shift. We are transformed by our life experiences, as you know. And so, the things that had happened to me really positioned me well to be able to not only get to take the notoriety with humility, but be able to really channel the energy around that into positive things that helped other people. And so, that's the difference for me.
All right. I got that. And thank you for sharing so articulately. I have a question. I think it's a bold question a little bit, Dr. Richard, which is, I think our listeners can now hear your complete and total life commitment to being of service to others, to get there, to, be a source or a pathway to their greatness by just functioning who you are, your technology platform, or as a podcast goes, how about that? Or really great. Or as a friend, a family member, just someone we get to know and then become better people just by knowing you. What are your goals? You like to be called Dr. Richard. And now I'm going to purposefully going to Richard Shuster here, like, the kid and Richard Shuster before doctor, with all due respect, Dr. Richard. And there's something like, what have you found for yourself that are your goals and values superseding over the top or underneath of being Dr. Richard as a human now?
I think as humans, we need to recognize the importance of that we wear many hats. So if you get up and go to work, that's one hat. You're an employee. Or if you own a business, you're an entrepreneur. Many of us are also parents, spouses, friends, and each one of those has its own unique sets of things that are associated with that, the behaviors, goals, ideologies, thoughts. So, for me as a person, number one, I'm a husband and a dad, and that comes first, So while I'm doing these things that will have obviously ancillary financial benefits for my
hold on. Let's not skip over what it means to be a dad. Tell us a little bit about who your kids are.
I'm not. Yeah. I'm very lucky. I have a 5 and a 7-year-old, and they're wonderful kids, and been married for 11 years. And my wife is just an amazing human being. And so it gives me the opportunity, the life that I have, the work that I do, that it's kind of like I get to incubate parenting lessons. And it's kind of like, I recently saw my dad over Thanksgiving, and I had a conversation with him. And I think, COVID and, some health issues I had this year that you're aware of really kind of brought how finite things are into perspective. And there are some things that I wanted to tell my dad, like how a lot of things he taught me as a kid, I recognize now, whether intentional or not, were really awesome parenting lessons that just kind of lay dormant in me until I had kids. And it was like, ding, ding, ding. Oh, yeah. Well, my dad did this. That's awesome. That's how I want to do this with my kids. And I got to share that all with him. So I think, I've got
beautiful
young kids. My oldest vaguely has some kind of knowledge about what a podcast is. He claims he's taking mine over when I'm an old man. He told me that recently, which we had never discussed that.
A family business.
But certainly, the things that are the side benefits of what I'm doing is I get to show up to all their stuff I did before there was a pandemic, right? Like, typically, with school, you have to schedule weeks in advance and get permission. Like, I just would show up. I was mystery reader, and I could show up my kids' kindergarten class and read stories to them, or, so they're going to remember that. They may not remember specifically what I did, why I was there, but they're going to know that I was there for their stuff. And that's really cool. And I'm excited to really shape them into young entrepreneurs with an emphasis on giving back. That's really exciting to me. That's something that nobody really teaches kids. Like nobody sits down with kids and teaches them how to start a business. My dad didn't do that with me. I mean, I got a job when I was 14. I've always worked. But I'm going to teach my kids like how to channel, and I don't know what it'll be. It might be a lemonade stand. It might be,
a paper route. It might be a paper route.
But I definitely want to instill that in them when they're young. And I want them, when they get older, and then they're going to get on Google and they're going to type my name in, and they're going to see literally hundreds of hours of audio and video, maybe thousands of hours by the time, I wrap all this up, of what I did and how I lived my life. And that is priceless to me. Being able to create this generational thing where that's passed down to my kids, and my kids are going to absorb that. And one day when they're parents, that little, ding, ding, ding thing's going to happen with them, just like it did with me. And that they're going to be able to, live a life where they do things kind of on their terms, where they do what they're really passionate about, but that they also are in the service of others. So that's exciting for me.
So thank you. It seems to me that I spent last week really looking at in a very comprehensive and intense way, looking at the impact that art was having on life. And, one of the things I'm hearing you say is that you're weaving or painting a tapestry in front of, at the service of, because of, through who you are as a husband, as a father. And, that this is the first and foremost who you are, husband and father. I mean, I get it. And there's something like already knowing that the bricks that you're laying down right here are going to have an impact into the generations. And for now, you're putting a stake in the ground, really happy, really proud, really eager, really, owning the impact that you're putting down for your children and for the generations to come in your family and beyond. Yes.
Yeah. As I had another close call this year where I suffered a stroke, and it worked out well for me. I fully recovered, and I'm very grateful that I have. But it also missed a major center in my brain by a millimeter, in which case I would be a burden to my family, certainly wouldn't be on this show right now, and life would be very different. So that, one has to ask themselves when they go through something like that, that if, today was the last day, would you say that you're proud of what you did? And almost the opposite of what I was feeling in that accident, right? When I was overwhelmed with guilt and shame. If today was it, if that stroke was it, then my legacy is here, right? Like, I've done what I've said I wanted to do. Now, obviously, that would suck and I wouldn't get to watch my kids grow up. But they would grow up knowing that I was, trying to do good in the world and that I did it on my terms and that the lessons I wanted them to know, I think, would be there. So in that sense, I'm very grateful and I'm very much at peace. I plan, as I know you do, Fred, I plan to be here a really long time. But
Yeah, I do.
in the event that, it was over, I feel at peace with what I'm doing now and how I'm doing it.
Thank you. One of the things that's been a theme on this still early morning since I woke up today has been this background theme of the fear or the victory or the triumph over the fear of death. Like that death, imminent as it may be, or in fact, maybe, years or decades into the future, is something that we deal with on a sometimes moment to moment, or maybe one could make a case it's every second, or, some people pretty much declare not afraid of death at all. So that's how they live. And in the things that we share here, this having had these near-death experiences or maybe we did die, and I guess that would be a podcast of a whole different color if we we're going to go
you did
there.
Talk about ghosts, so
and yeah, we did, and really looking at what my relationship is with death colors the context of my day. So, I've sat today already. I've done my breathing. I've, drank my juice and taken my remedy and drank my water and put on some clothes and came down here to make sure that you'd be taken care of on this conversation. And all of this sort of flies inside of a context, at least for me, of what's my relationship with death today? Like, if I died today, is it good? Is today really actually a good day to, a great day to die? As First Nation sometimes is given credit to say before, is it like, am I good with living my life courageously, unapologetically? Is this, have I really set out and then completed who I wanted to be as a human so that I can, if the next second is my last, say, no, I'm not shameful. I own with completion that who I was when I was here. And, it's about the third or fourth time that the idea of bringing up death with you has come to my mind in this now 29-minute interview. But the third or fourth time just had to be that I had to ring this bell. I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to your relationship with death.
When I was lying in the hospital after my stroke earlier this summer, it was pretty wild. If you've been into the hospital lately, you know that going to the hospital now is very different than pre-COVID. And so, I had to basically get them to admit me. It's almost like you have to go through an interview process to get into a hospital. There's a person in a hazmat suit in this big plastic tent, and you tell them your symptoms, and they're like, well, how do you know? And I was like, this. And so when I'm initially in there before, and I already knew just because of my training and what I was experiencing that it had to be a stroke. Nothing else made sense. But in that moment, it's not confirmed till it's confirmed. And I'm thinking, and because that's how Luke Perry died too. Like, it wasn't the initial stroke that killed Luke Perry. It was aftershock, so to speak. Strokes are kind of like earthquakes, right? It's not the first. It's like the consequences of what happens after. And so I'm just desperately trying to get some blood thinners in me and convince them that I need them. But I'm thinking like, man, I don't know what's going to happen here. And so to juxtapose that from the first time I was in the hospital when I broke my back, again, like I was overwhelmed with guilt and shame the first go round. The second go round, this time most recently, I was not. Obviously, I very much wanted to live and I'm a fighter and I still have work to do at all levels. But again, I don't think, as I sit here and talk about it today, I don't think that, I fear death in the same way that I would have 20-something years ago. And that's one, because I'm a bit more mature, but two, because I know for me, like a lot of people say on their deathbed, right, like they have their regrets. Oh, I wish I had spent more time with my loved ones or done things I like. I can honestly say now that, I am so content in my life and so excited about what I'm doing that I don't think I'd have any regrets. I don't think I'd have any regrets or fear, like in the sense, when it's my time, it's my time. And I don't know when my time is. Could be tomorrow, could be 30 years, could be 70 years, depending on, medicine and cloning or whatever else happens. But
Right.
I suspect I'm going to be doing for the rest of my career what I'm doing now. And I love it so much. And I feel so good about it that, I think, I'm not like opening my arms to the Grim Reaper and say, okay, come take me. But I think there's some contentment about how I'm living my life right now, and that I think I'd be at peace.
So, yeah, I get that. And thank you for being so articulate in your description. And I want to maybe shine a light, and maybe this is for me and then hopefully for our listeners, that's one of the components that has sort of courage to take a next big giant step available. Because one of the reasons I might not take a giant step on any given moment is that I'm fearful, fearful that it might lead ultimately to death. Almost all fears are only a couple degrees of separation from death anyways. And there's really just this notion that, and that death would be horrible or scary or, undesirable or hateful or the last thing I want to face or any of that. And, somehow not looking at it square as the only inevitability of life. When I have a moment or two or a string of time for which I can embrace death as inevitable and, not something I'm looking forward to necessarily or driving towards, like you say, embracing the Grim Reaper, not quite, then that's when I somehow become even more courageous to take the big steps that are being called forth from me as a contribution to humanity, as a contribution to my clients or my friends or my family or my colleagues, my neighbors, my fellow world citizens. And I don't know, Dr. Richard, it just seems like maybe that's like a critical component of courage, is taking on death, like not being afraid to be afraid of death, but just embracing it and then moving forward in the face of its inevitability and not as a way to prevent me from doing what I want to do.
I think so much money is spent and energy is focused. I certainly look at consumer products to do everything they can to avoid aging and death, right? And so again, it kind of harkens back to, if you had to ask yourself this question, and I'm asking this not of you, Dr. Fred, but really everyone listening to this, is that if today was the day, if you were at 11:59 p.m. tonight, you expired, what are your accomplishments? What are your fears? What are your regrets? And ask those questions, because if the fears and regrets and the guilt and the list of things you wish you had done radically outweighs those things of which you're proud of, I would say that's a really awesome wake-up call to do something about that and do it today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, today's a good day to do it if it's going to be our last day here. And I certainly have also lived a time in my life where there was a radical outweighing of those characteristics of my life, for which shame and guilt and, hiding and mistrust and mistrusting myself and deviance and all sorts of things that I just was not proud of were running the show. Now, what's interesting is that while that was going on, I wasn't paying attention to that going on. I was just kind of like muscling my way through another minute and didn't often see that. I even declare today that I didn't see at all that there was another way to live life through then. Even had someone said you're having a wake-up call, I don't know that I would have been able to do anything about it. It's like, oh, there's a wake-up call, pass another beer, oh, there's a wake-up call, how about who's got the cocaine? It's like, yeah, I don't want to look at a wake-up call, let's go back to bed or let's run away somewhere. So our question now is like, all right, so there's people out there who have a radical outweighing of undesirable attributes or characteristics that are running life that could theoretically be turned around so that, they or we get to a point where we're like, yep, I lived my life. I contributed. I'm happy with where I am if today's that day. What do you say to them? I mean, these people who are, don't have the stronghold or the foothold necessarily readily available. They have, in other words, not able to hover over themselves high enough to see that there is another possibility besides living this life of shame.
There's an exercise that I often do with a room of people when I'm on stage, and it's a mini hypnotic episode. We don't have time to do the whole thing now, but what I take people through is an experience where they essentially visualize everything that brings them immense pleasure, and to give them the permission, and a lot of times we don't give ourselves permission, but to give them the permission and the space to be very creative and list all of those things that just fill them with joy and passion. Not allowing in the voices that pop up in their head to say, oh, that's stupid, you don't deserve it, you wouldn't have time for this, you could never make a living doing from this, all of the negative stuff around us that we don't even know that we subconsciously take in. But if you eliminate that and give people permission to be in a space where they have that freedom to dream, you now can generate a pretty cool list of things you love to do. What I also would encourage people to do is get very granular and have clarity around what are their values, because dreams, values, goals are related. They're all different. And so if you really understand what are your lines in the sand, what are the things that you think are acceptable, what are the things you don't think are acceptable. And so if you know your values and what you stand for, and then you have a pretty good idea of what are the things that just bring you unbridled passion and joy, that's a really great starting point, Dr. Fred. No, I'm not suggesting that, spend half an hour with this afternoon and then go quit your job, because that's stupid. I know there are people out there that burn all the ships, and then you have, no. It's important that you be rational about this, because this is something that you can find. So maybe for example, let's say that, animals are something that really brings you pleasure. Okay. Now, if you're 42 years old, you may or may not want to go through veterinarian school, right? Yeah, it's a long journey. However, what if you could keep your job and volunteer a couple weekends a month at the Humane Society? Couldn't that instill some joy into your life? So it's not necessarily a one-to-one correlation between doing something and making money. Now, that obviously, if you can find a way to do that, to make money off of something you're passionate about, that's awesome. That's like having your cake and eating it too. But just by identifying those things that bring us passion in our lives, you can start to incorporate that into your life. And by doing it, you will attract more opportunities to further do it, to surround yourself with people that enjoy that too. And there's commonality in that. And that's a really good starting point. For somebody who's struggling financially, or who's struggling in their relationships, or feels as though their friendships are, there could be more optimal, relationships in their lives. I think that's a better way to say it. This is not a panacea, right? Like, you don't go through this activity and then all of a sudden life's amazing. But, we've heard people since the 1930s telling us, Dale Carnegie talked about this, right? People we surround ourselves with, Jim Rohn said that you're an average of the 5 people you surround yourselves with. And so everybody talks about stuff like this, but we actually now know through neuroscience that there are things in our brains called mirror neurons. And listen, if you want to be a happy person and you surround yourself with primarily negative people, those mirror neurons are going to adjust just like a thermostat in a house, and you'll be miserable too. And there is no way around that. And there's science that backs that. So, it's really a combination of a lot of things, Dr. Fred. It's being clear on who you are, what's exciting to you, and then manipulating your environment, modifying your environment to support optimal happiness. So really, to achieve optimal happiness, you need to understand what fires you, what drives you, and modify your environment with the optimal people so that you can have that balance and happiness.
Awesome. Super great. It sounds like such a powerful exercise that you do, and the impact is already on me as you've done. You're right. I've gotten a little taste of it just by taking myself there during your speaking. So thank you for that. And I also speak for the listeners who did the same. And speaking of that, how can my listeners, we're going to taper off here, and we obviously could talk for hours and should. How can our listeners, or my listeners, or the listeners who are picking up this podcast, how can they find you? How can they follow you? How can they get to your podcast, or to contact you? Anything like that? What's the best way to do that, Dr.
Sure. Yeah, the mothership is drrichardschuster.com, and you can spell it any way you want. I bought every imaginable domain configuration. The actual one is drrichardschuster.com. My podcast is at thedailyhelping.com. Thedailyhelping.com is the show. And in either website, there's a forum page there where people can reach out to me, and I'm always happy to hear from people in the audience. It's awesome. So reach out, and I hope this was of value to anybody listening to this.
Certainly it was. Absolutely. You're amazing. And what are you doing the rest of the week? What's this week look like? Just briefly.
A few more podcast interviews, and then time with my family, actually.
Actually, that somehow makes total sense. I got it. All right. Well, gosh, so life zooms by, and this is another episode, another wonderful episode, just a fully gratifying episode with, as I told your listeners, an extraordinary human being who knows himself to have earned his spot here, to have actually gotten to a place where he could, if today was that fateful day, that he could say he contributed a legacy to his family and to humanity. And so, Dr. Richard, it's been a deep and honest privilege and pleasure to have you on Welcome to Humanity today. Thank you again for taking the time and energy to be here.
It was great being here, Fred. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. And to our listeners, thank you for hanging around. Thank you for being here at this point. It's been a deep pleasure. It always is. I wish you a great day, a great rest of the day, a great rest of the week, great rest of the month, and a great rest of your life. And today really might be the last day, so live it like that. For now, anyhow, this is Dr. Fred from Welcome to Humanity signing off. Thanks for joining us. Talk to you soon. Bye for now. Something I really noticed today that really struck me from today's show was just how great of a interviewer Dr. Shuster is. Dr. Rick is just like, he's up to so much. And, who he's become is somewhat of a national figure, somewhat of an international figure. And he's meeting people, and he really remains his own sort of pleasant, humble, and yet spectacular and extraordinary self. What an honor it was to meet this man who has really made a difference in this platform, in this venue, and continues to do so each and every day. It really is a gift to have him as a guest, and I hope you enjoyed him as much as I did. And maybe when you were listening, you thought of a person or two or three who needs to hear this episode. Go ahead and reach out to them right now and invite them to subscribe to the Welcome to Humanity podcast. And while you're at it, I'd like to ask a favor of you that is, well, it's huge in terms of impact. Could you just take a moment and hit the subscribe button on your podcast player? And while you're at it, go ahead and review it. Because subscribes and reviews are the two major ways we can reach more listeners with the Welcome to Humanity podcast. And if the conversations we're having here have contributed in a positive way to your life, please pay it forward by subscribing and leaving a wonderful review. I would be truly grateful for that. Also, to catch up on past episodes, head on over to welcometohumanity.net/podcast. Until next time, well, this is Dr. Fred, and this has been another awesome edition of the Welcome to Humanity podcast. Thanks for listening. Have a gorgeous day. See you on the flip side.